Hello, my name is Claire Miller-Bersoulet. I'm Head of Student Services. Today I'm going to talk to you about the various housing options for students at ULIP. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to discuss today, first of all, where, in terms of the different areas of Paris you might want to live in, what the different options are, when you should plan to be choosing your accommodation, and what resources are available to you. So first of all, where to live. I think it's important to do some research before you decide on your housing option and what area of Paris you might want to live in, or the outskirts of Paris for that matter. Some of you might know Paris quite well, some might have only been here a few times and might not know it at all. So I think kind of doing your homework, doing some research in advance is a useful tip. You can talk to current students via the Facebook group or just do your research online just to get a feel for different areas of Paris. Now, in terms of the accommodation options, I think most people will be watching this video will know that ULIP is a small institution and we don't have our own halls of residence or housing. We do have a partnership with a private hall of residence, which I'll discuss in a bit further later, but that does mean that different students choose different housing options. So even first year, students might go to a hall or live in a studio flat or flat share or live with a family. So there's no kind of one answer to where do students live. The other options that I've listed here are the Cité Internationale Universitaire, which is mostly for postgraduate students, and private hostel, which is not a very common option. So I won't discuss those in detail, but I'll talk about the other ones in a bit more detail, just a minute. So first of all, student halls of residence. As I mentioned before, we have an arrangement with Nexity JDR. And so that's the main hall of residence that students might choose to go to. The advantage is that you can book in advance. In the case of Nexity JDR, you book directly through us. So it makes it an easy option to arrange while you're away from Paris and in advance. The bills are included, they're well equipped, so you don't have to worry about setting up your electricity or kind of buying a lot when you first arrive in your flat. The cost can be a drawback. It's not necessarily the cheapest option. The Nexity flats are frequently refurbished. They're quite central, so it's not the most affordable of options. And I've put the location as a disadvantage because there are about 30 minutes on the metro to ULIP. So that's not that much if you're used to living in a big city. But for some people, not being able to walk to university or if it's quite a long bicycle ride, that might be a bit off-putting. So to say a bit more about the Nexity Studio, so we book approximately 40 studio flats per year in 2 different locations. So in Vivaldi Hall of Residence, which is in the 12th arrondissement. So you have 2 sizes, approximately 16 square meters and 22 square meters at £750 and £840 respectively. And in Vanves, which is southern outskirts of Paris, £730 for approximately 18 square meters. So the contracts are directly with the University of London, the 9-month contracts, which can be extended or can be terminated in advance if needed. So because the contracts are directly with the University of London, that's why the rents are in pounds. So you wouldn't have to adjust the monthly rent depending on the exchange rate. That price does include utilities such as water and electricity and heating and housing insurance as well. So the Nexity Vivaldi in the 12th arrondissement And in Vanves, so as you can see, they're both about 30 minutes on the metro. So quite different areas. Vivaldi is more, it's more kind of closer to student bars and kind of social activities maybe. Vanves is more residential. There are plenty of like shops for grocery shopping and cafes, but perhaps less in terms of nightlife, for example. So independent housing, this would be either a studio flat or chambre de bonne. Chambre de bonne, which literally means maid's room. You would often find in kind of bourgeois buildings where you'd have maid's quarters on the upper floors. So a lot of those have now been refurbished into studio flats for students. But some of them are quite small, starting from 9 square meters, and some may or may not include your own facilities, so your own toilet or shower. So when you see an advert for chambre de bonne, you should kind of pay attention to whether the shower and toilet are on the landing and possibly shared with other chambre de bonne, or whether they're within the studio, the chambre de bonne, and only for your own usage. So the advantage of the independent housing is the wide price range, because you have, as I said, these very small chambre de bonne, which could be quite cheap, but you have kind of bigger, nicer studio flats, which would be more expensive, obviously. But there's a good price range, so everything for something for all kinds of budgets. You also have a good range of locations in all areas of Paris. And for people who like to be autonomous and independent and just have their own place and not have to share anything, it's kind of a good option. On the drawbacks, it can be lonely. If you're leaving home for the first time, you might think that you would enjoy living on your own, but you might get lonely at times. And as I mentioned before, some of the chambres de bonne are really quite small. So 9 square meters really isn't a lot. So you might want to try and measure out what that would mean, whether you could see yourself living in something like that. Flat sharing, that's a popular option among students, even in the first year. So first year students might decide to flat share with students that they've met via ULIP events or the Facebook groups, for example. And it's kind of a good way of getting to know people and kind of living arriving to Paris with someone else. There's in terms of the affordability, that's kind of one of the cheaper options, because you're sharing the common areas as well as all the bills with other people. There can be landlord problems. I would say that there are good landlords and bad landlords, in the same way that landlords might say they're good tenants and bad tenants. So there can be some issues to work out with some landlords sometimes. And I've put flatmates as a good thing and a bad thing, just because your flatmates could become your best friends and everything will work out fine. But sometimes if you don't agree on kind of noise levels at night or cleanliness, there might be issues there. So it's worth having a conversation with your flatmates to make sure that the flatmates don't become a problem. So living and working arrangements would be when you're working in exchange for housing. So that could be within a family flat, for example, or it could be working for a family and you get free or reduced rent for a chambre de bonne or studio flat in exchange. So the more common ones would be kind of nannying, where you do certain number of hours of school pickups or nannying in exchange for free or reduced rent on housing. You might also have the equivalent arrangement for English tuition, for example. Those would be the most common. So in terms of the advantages of that is the price. So sometimes you get free rent or kind of rent at a very reduced price. And if you're living or working for a French family, you do pick up more French earlier, sooner. On the disadvantages, working hours, it's kind of important to have a clear understanding of how many hours you're expected to work every week, and kind of be strict about how much work you can do so that it's not affecting your studies. And in terms of house rules, if you're living within the family flat, there might be rules as to whether you're able to have guests, or kind of if there are specific times you might be able to use the kitchen, for example. So all of these are important to discuss in advance, so you're not finding yourself in a situation where things aren't the way you'd expecting them to be. So I would say that it's important to visit flats before committing yourself. That's not always possible, I understand, but you can sometimes get current students to help you out with that. There's a website that is popular among students, which is Central Paris Rentals. A lot of students rent through them. Some flats are nicer than others, so if you find a flat that you like on there, it's worth checking with current students. The chances are that they will know which flat it is, and they might be able to tell you a bit more about the flat, in terms of whether it's damp, whether it's noisy, whether there are any mice, things like that you might need to know in advance. If you're renting from a private landlord, I would say that it's very important to see it. There are kind of scams out there. So if you went renting from kind of an individual you found online, I would try and get a current student to kind of check that it's legit if you're not able to come to Paris. If you're renting through an agency, there's less likely that it'll be a scam, but if it's kind of an individual, do be careful. Something else I would say is make sure you understand the contract. Quite often the contract will be in French, so do send it over to student services. We'll be happy to look at it and make sure that you've understood everything that's written in the contract. And going back to kind of avoiding scams, sometimes you'll be asked to pay a down payment to view a flat or to kind of have access to a housing list. Those are usually scams. So you should never be expected to pay anything until you're kind of ready to sign a contract. Never to view a flat or to kind of get access to adverts. So, I mean, in terms of kind of deciding what option is right for you, I mean, one of the key things is going to be working out a budget. So here I've put a kind of an indicative budget with housing of 750 euros. I mean, as you would have seen in this presentation, some students will pay much less than that. Some people will pay more than that. And there are some kind of some to give you an idea of what else you might need to be thinking about. I mean, the food and drink and the entertainment and leisure, that will vary a lot from one student to the next. But just to give you an idea, just think about the financial side of things. In terms of financial support for UK students, so the maintenance loan for 2021-22 will be up to 10,866 per year. That's at the overseas rate of maintenance loan. You can be eligible of a bursary of up to 1,700 euros per year. And you can also have a CAF housing benefit from the French government. So that's approximately 200 euros per month for a studio flat and 100 euros per month for flat share. So it is a bit annoying to apply for, but it's definitely worth doing, and we'll help you with that during induction week. So, going back to the student loans, there's further information where you can work out your eligibility on the government website. So just leaving with our contact details here. So myself, Claire, or my colleagues, Catherine or Olivia, are always happy to help if you have any question, big or small. You should also read the accommodation guide, which will be made available to you, as well as the Moving to Paris guide, which has information about kind of other practical things like banking and visa applications as well. So the accommodation guide will have lots of links to some of the resources mentioned here, and we'll make sure that you have access to this presentation as well. Thank you for listening.